The Southern African Alcohol Policy Alliance is calling for an immediate halt in issuing liquor licenses to retailers at fuel stations. In June, BP Pick and Pay Express were awarded grocer's license, which allows them to sell wine. It's the first such license in the country. The SAAPA says a license that allowed wine sales at BP and Pick and Pay Express stores went against the National Liquor Policy Act of 2016. The body's SA Director, Maurice Smithers, joins us now to talk a little bit more about it. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Just share with us, what are your concerns?
Thanks, Provincial. Look, our concerns are the same as concerns of countries around the world, and that is that and in particular in South Africa, where we have a major drink driving problem, that if you have wine available or any other alcohol but wine at this stage available at petrol stations, there is a potential for an increase in drink driving violations, because you can imagine people going into the shop while they're filling up with petrol, buying a packet of chips perhaps, and then a bottle of wine, and sitting in their car, and just as much as they might then begin to eat the chips in the car, they can just as well begin to drink the wine in the car. That's one of our key concerns. But our other concern is that we already have, by many people's admission, far too many liquor outlets in the country, both licensed and unlicensed. And with the country having over 5,000 petrol stations, do we really want to add to the number of liquor outlets in the country when we should actually be trying to reduce the numbers that we have and thereby reduce alcohol-related harm?
Can you tell me, just from a legislation point of view, is there a huge difference, for instance, between the grocer's license, which I mentioned, then there's the hotel liquor licenses, there's the restaurant liquor licenses, the club liquor licenses? So I'm just trying to understand the novelty of this and how it came about.
Okay, well, look, I mean, first of all, there's two different kind of licenses, particularly in Gauteng. Let's take that as an example. You have what you call on-consumption licenses and off-consumption license. So on-consumption is things like pubs, taverns, restaurants, and so on. Off-consumption would be bottle stores, and then grocer's wine would fit into that category as an off-consumption license, which basically is historically what was issued to supermarkets. So a supermarket could apply for a grocer's license and then sell wine off the shelves in the supermarket for people to take home and drink. Of course, since 2003, as far as supermarkets is concerned, that has changed. So now they are able to have fully fledged bottle stores, which most of them do have. I'm sure you've noticed that if you go into a mall and there's a Pick and Pay there, nearby there will be a fully fledged Pick and Pay bottle store as well. So that's the fundamental difference between the two. So a petrol station getting a grocer's license will be similar to a supermarket having a grocer's license, being able to sell wine for taking away but not drinking on the premises.
So we've spoken about this happening in Gauteng, I believe, the Pick and Pay Express and BP applying for these licenses. Do you have fears or suspicions that similar applications could be made elsewhere? And are they governed by different provincial liquor acts?
Unfortunately, yes, is in answer to your last question. We have a situation in South Africa where you can have national legislation. So the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, who are the custodians of national liquor policy, are able to have a national policy and a national law, but they are constrained by the Constitution in terms of how much they can influence what is done by provinces, because they are the custodians of retail liquor licenses. So we currently have a liquor policy for the country, which was adopted in 2016, which recommended that you don't have liquor licenses at petrol stations. And then in the same year, 2016, Cabinet also approved for public comment the Liquor Amendment Bill, which specifically precludes petrol stations getting licenses. Unfortunately, that hasn't been passed yet. So it's not actually legislation, and therefore There are constraints on what the DTIC can do in relation to that. We've discussed it with them, and they say that they can discuss it with the provinces, but they have no actual control over them. And we've discovered recently, in fact, that interestingly, that the Western Cape, in their 2008 Liquor Act, did actually forbid the liquor licenses for petrol stations, but for some reason they rescinded that in their 2015 legislation. So it's a bit of a confusing thing at the moment, and that's why we as SAAPA have approached all the provinces and said, because this legislation is pending from national, we recommend that they put a halt to any new licenses of this nature, because if the DTIC goes through with the Liquor Amendment Bill and it becomes law, and it does forbid such licenses, what will then happen with those places that already have licenses? So we think it would be better to prevent that problem arising than to have to deal with it at a later stage.
And you say it costs governments about 260 billion rand in alcohol-related harm and some of the fatal crashes caused by drunk driving. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Maurice Smithers is director at Southern African Alcohol Policy Alliance, saying they want to put a stop to what has been approved at the BP and Pick and Pay Express, that licenses to retailers at fuel stations can be operational.